Today we're going to be talking about F words, not those F words. We're going to be talking about fight or flight and other F words that are often responses to stressors. So weirdly, we're going to be talking about the automatic response nervous system and a little bit of brain stuff, but I'm going to contextualize it and give you some tools and ideas to help you kind of work through some of these if you run into them, and also contextualize them in the larger social interactions that we have. So with that, let's get down to it. We're going to fight, flight, fight, flight, fight, flight. Boom! Let's go! So our bodies have this regulatory mechanisms all throughout them, and most of them are involved in keeping us in what's called homeostasis. It just means your kind of body is staying the same. So we get hungry because we need more calories and we need to fill our stomachs. We release insulin, we release hormones, we release cortisol, and all these things are trying to keep us steady. We like being steady. Steady's good. But sometimes something might scare you. Something might freak you out. Something may surprise you. And in that moment, you have these other mechanisms that jump in and go, homeostasis is not good for our survival. We need to do something. And that thing that we most often do is fight or flight. It's also known punch and run. Punch or run, either way, it's a bad first state. So fight or flight is your body's reaction to a surprise stimulus or an excess stressor. It kind of goes, ah! Releases adrenaline, releases cortisol, does a whole bunch of things inside of your body to get you ready to really quick beat the crap out of something or really quick get away from something. But that system has other responses too. And because scientists are fun people and it's more fun to write about it this way, they all start with F right now. They just happen to, although some are a little stretched, but it works. So fight or flight are the ones that most everybody's familiar with. The two that have been added most recently are fawn and freeze. Fawn you can think of kind of like when a dog gives up to a bigger dog and rolls over on their belly and they go, oh, look, I'm harmless. I'm so harmless. But you also see it in people, where in a highly stressful and possibly dangerous situation, people go, no, I'm not a threat, man. You're so cool. It's cool. Don't worry about stuff. I'm not going to do anything. It's fine. That's fawning. The other one is freeze. You can think of this one like a deer in the headlights. So deers freeze in place because when they're out in the wild, it benefits them in two ways when there's danger. If there's something that may be dangerous, they can stop, stare right at it, and hold still. By holding still, they blend into the background better and don't look like they could be the target for whatever's coming after them. And at the same time, by holding perfectly still, they can see if something's moving and they need to run. So it's this kind of response where you go, oh, okay, we're all good. Okay, woohoo, or huh, and then they're out of there, gone. There's also some that may or may not line up. One that they bring up once in a while is fret. Fret is like a nervous worrying, and it's a response to stress. You see this in dogs when you leave the house, and they kind of walk around and they're squeaky and worried because they're fretting. They're responding to a stress by fretting. The other one that you'll run into is faint. And faint is when you're so overwhelmed that you have this myotonic blood pressure change. And because it happens, you go, oh! And you pass out, you lose consciousness. It is called a syncope, is the technical term for when you lose consciousness. And it can be due to a lot of things. But if it is due to an extreme stressor or terrifying thing, it's in this box, right? So then we have fight, flight, freeze, fawn, fret, and faint. We're mostly going to be talking about the first four because the last two tend to be kind of ancillary reactions. I've never experienced a full faint. I have experienced fret, I guess you'd call it. There's times where I've been so stressed that I'm nervous and kind of pacing, but it didn't feel the same as the others. The others are a more immediate response. We're going to go over the systems real quick and how they work, and then we're going to dive into what they mean and what we can do about them. So the two systems that are working on these are called the sympathetic adrenal medullary system. And what that is, it's the one that goes fight or flight, really. It's the adrenaline is released. You are going to do something really quick. You're either going to run or you're going to punch, right? So that stress response is almost immediate. The second one is called the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system. And this one's kind of a longer engage with stress. This is the one that's going to kind of set you up to have that fawning or have that momentary freeze while your adrenaline builds. But that's the one that longer term contributes to greater cortisol in your body. If you think of them in a familial way, like in if you're talking about a family, the first one, sympathetic adrenal medullary, is when dad's yelling at you, you did something wrong and everybody's getting the belt. You're gonna feel that first one, oh no, the adrenaline's gonna flow. But if you live in a house where you're always afraid that dad's gonna blow, and there's tension, and there's not always food, and you may not always be sleeping in the same spot, then you have more of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal system going, and that slow drip of cortisol. Now that's dangerous because cortisol and high stress levels can lead to blood pressure issues, heart attack, stroke. There's a lot of long-term dangers to things that are continual stressors and are continually elicit that response. So we have those two systems. They work in these parts of the brain, hypothalamus and amygdala mainly. Then they tell your cerebral cortex kind of how to respond. But we're going to get back to this. The cerebral cortex can also be used to mediate these and take the impulses and reactions that you're feeling and kind of modulate them. So the autonomic nervous system, this whole suite of things, the two systems we just talked about, it's all the actions the body takes on its own. And the reason that the fight or flight and fawn and freeze are kind of in a different category is because of how high up level they are. Now I'm going to go through the levels, and there's 7 of these. And the highest ones, 5, 6, and 7, are very much where you have to do something because there's some immediate threat to your well-being or your survival. Number 1 is arrest and alert. It's associated with curiosity. It's kind of, what is that? What's that over there? In the wild, this is super useful because you can see a novel thing. You can see something out of the ordinary. It's also known as our orienting reflex, and it's why when there's a lot of TVs in a sports bar, and you're trying to eat, you just get pulled back to the TV. Keep switching what it's showing you and pulling on that curiosity. Second one is stiffen and orient. It's associated with focused attention, interest, and preparedness. This is where there's an alerting thing, but it's not something that you're looking for or being aware of. You just kind of go, wait, what was that? Where was that? Where am I? The third one is assess. It's associated with intense interest, friendliness, or repulsion. This is informed by what our body remembers as well as our personal history. So this is something that develops over time, and it's when your cerebral cortex is doing more of that processing. It's kind of taking in this information, running it through, and while it is, your body's in a state of assessment. Approach or avoid. This is not fight or flight. This is one down from there. So in approach and avoid, this is specifically referring to how when they bring a really nice plate of food in front of you and you kind of lean and you go, this is gonna be good. Or they bring you something that's kind of not what you're expecting, and it's liver and onions, and kind of, I don't know. Except, Dad, I mean, you're good with liver and onions for weird reasons. We'll leave that alone. Next one, 5, right? Fight or flight. Very similar to the last one, except instead of appeal or disinterest, it's GTFO, there's another F word, GTFO, or GTFI, get the F in. You're in or you're out. You're fighting or you're running. And that's experienced as fear. Freezing has 2 things here. So one of them is what we were talking about earlier with deer and how they freeze in the headlights. The other way freezing occurs is in states of terror. And in states of terror, you can become almost catatonic and freeze and just lock up. There's the only times I think I've experienced this is when I'm coming out of a dream and the dream felt so real, and I'm lying in my bed for a second and I'm terrified of what I had dreamt about. And it's almost a lockup sensation. I've also felt this when I was very young and home alone, and I read way too many alien books, too many things about Bigfoot, scary movies on TV. You hear a noise outside and your mind goes and you just lock up. Usually it's when there's no immediate, for me, when there's no immediate danger, it's just the idea of danger is scary. The last one is collapse or fold. This is associated with helpless or hopeless horror. This is where fainting and lack of consciousness can occur, but it's also just a total give out of all of your muscles. It's a despairing reaction. So in those more intense activation states, the last three, there's an abrupt shift to the powerfully compelling emotions of fear, rage, terror, and horror that erupts into all-out action, immobilization, or collapse. The goal for your brain and your body is to successfully execute on a safe exit from the situation. It's why a lot of animals are not aggressively confrontational unless they are cornered. When you have dogs that are bred for fighting, they flip the script on these. They make the response more likely to be aggression than regression. You also see this in the honey badger. This guy, he is so aggressive and he's so out there and so in your face. You'll also see fight in mothers when they're protecting their young. All of a sudden they're one step away, but their reaction is not to flee until their children can flee. And because they're often faster than their children, it's the old adage of, I don't have to be faster than the bear, I just have to be faster than you, except in this case, it's the bear and her babies, or cubbies. So that's a different kind of space for them, but these all kind of fit in the same way, right? So you start looking at it and going, this isn't as discrete as punch or run, fight or flight. This is a whole suite of responses that depend on the situation, the history, the training, and the development of the individual. They'll also change by age. If you go back and watch the Licky Rats episode, you can think about that in terms of how they responded to their environment in curiosity, which is really low, right? That was level 1 on here. So even that can be trained. These ideas and these responses to stress are happened in, and this is a little bit funky, but stay with me because I'm going to use science words and then I'm going to talk about it. They're mediated by what are called chromaffin cells of the adrenal medulla invertebrata. Following sympathetic cholinergic input, the activation of majorly nicotinic receptors provokes action potentials and the neurochemical release of adrenaline or noradrenaline. What that all means is that your brain takes these inputs that you get from sound, sight, tip of a knife in your back, right? Anything that's going to make you respond. And that cascade ends with this through the roof of adrenaline or noradrenaline. And it's happening in what are called the nicotinic cells. They're called nicotinic cells because we discovered them through cigarettes, through nicotine. We found out that they were reacting to nicotine. Well, no, they're cells there for nicotine, but they're not. That's not what they actually do. They're there to help mediate your arousal state, which is why cigarettes work so well, right? So these nicotinic receptors are all through your nervous system and skeletal muscles, and they really work on go, no-go. They're kind of in this enervate state when you stimulate them. You go, yeah, they go, yeah, let's go. So that's important to know. But that whole thing, that chemical cascade, leads us to kind of my first point I'm going to make about thinking about these responses. When you have fight or flight responses, it's often to new or novel stimulus. And by repeated exposure to that stimulus, you can change your response to it if you start being aware of and watching what your body does. It's called metacognition. It's kind of thinking about thinking. So when you see your body start to do automatic things, you can think about how that all feels. It's a meditative practice too, where you just think about how it all feels. You are not thinking and feeling every part of your body right now. Feel your left foot. Right now you're aware of it, but while you're aware of your left foot, how aware are you of your right hand? How aware are you of the top of your head? What about the tip of your tongue? What are you smelling right now? All these things are automatic, but when you switch and start focusing attention back and forth between how your body's experiencing the world, you start to see that you can sit on top of that and almost drive it. And so when these stress responses come in, being exposed to stress is repeated exposure. right? So it doesn't have to be the same thing. You're never gonna be adequately exposed to all possible stimuli. But what you can do is start to look at them. My nephew jumps out of planes for fun, and he took me with him. So I went for my first jump ever with him out of a plane, and I had a guy strapped to my back, and we went up in a rickety plane, and he and his buddy jumped out holding on to each other's feet and spun around a bunch and then detached and then parachutes out. Great time. I went forward out of this thing. I'm staring at the ground, and the guy behind me is tapping me and trying to get me to look at the horizon. I look and it's amazing, but my whole body is screaming that this is the wrong place to be. Now, I've done stuff with parachutes off the ground where you take off and kind of cruise around and hang out for a while, but I've never fallen out of a plane going 50, 60 miles an hour straight towards the ground. My body had a huge response. I landed and got back down to the ground, and by the time I got into the hangar, I had to sit down and recover from the massive adrenal spike that I'd experienced. That kind of exposure is not easy to get repeatedly. I want to go jump out of a plane again to see what it feels like and if it's that intense again. This is where you get some people that really like that and are adrenaline junkies. Alex Honnold is one. I don't understand how he can hang off the side of building or boulders like he does and climb El Capitan and do that with no ropes. But most of us aren't adrenaline junkies. Most of us kind of want to be in homeostasis. We want to be level. We want to be okay. And so that's where it's important to kind of start watching, going, what is my normal response? Am I a fighter? Am I a fleer? Do I fawn? Do I freeze? How do I respond to stress? And is that how I want to respond to stress? Because you can start choosing and mediating those things. So all of these responses, and I've hit a bunch of them already, they're there because they're helpful. They're beneficial to keep us alive. But you do get situations where they arise and they're not beneficial. I go to the licky rats again, and again, it's a good episode to watch, but that idea of living in a high stress environment as a child, and one of the things that you see is that the normal response to what is a dangerous environment as a child can set you up to be kind of on the edge as an adult. And I think about extroverts and introverts in this, where extroverts are more likely to be promoted, they're more likely to be rewarded just because they're more obvious, where introverts tend not to be. And you can be introverts, extroverts, that's not my point here. My point here is that sometimes an introvert is made because the safest stress response as a child is to be quiet, to be unseen, to be unheard. And that's just this dangerous space where you have people that grow up in dangerous environments, and then it sets up their whole life. It sets up this kind of space where they have a harder time moving forward and advancing to the place that they want to be in the world. So the other way, and this is just a recovery piece, the other way that you can react to the stresses is breathing. And there's a strategy called box breathing, where you count your breaths and you form the side of a box with your mind as you go through it. And those are very helpful as well. You can also distract and reset your mind by counting backwards in multiples of 7 from 102. Here's one for you guys at work. At work, if the boss is yelling at you, you may have that fight or flight reaction. That is not what you want to do. This is a really good point to kind of mediate it, process through it, and then go talk to HR maybe. But if you're in a position where you like your job, you want to keep working there, it's best if you're able to kind of mediate that need to lash out, run away, fawn, freeze. I'm sure you're fretting, but you're not fainting. The other one is the long-term stuff where every day it seems like there's too much work and so you can't quite get it done in the allotted time. So it starts eating into the extra 20 minutes, extra half hour. That's the slow drip stuff. That's the long-term cortisol that may affect your blood pressure, your heart, and your possibility of a stroke. So in those situations, you should kind of work on getting your load manageable. Because once you do that and kind of set yourself up to be where you need to be, you can start to get back to that homeostasis, right? And when you're in that homeostasis and everything's clicking along, then when you get stimulated, it's probably not going to be a stress response. It'll be a joyful response, a happy response, one that releases dopamine and oxytocin. Just flood your brain with joy, because that's what we want. More of that, less cortisol. So there we go, Dad. There's a bunch of F words. I hope it wasn't too salacious, but now you got some idea of what to do when you're feeling like fighting or flighting or fawning or freezing. Fainting's a hard one to work around. If you're so terrified you faint and have a syncope, I don't have a solution for that one. That said, love you, Dad. Bye.